that's not how it started. I mean, that's how it felt, but not how it actually started. Don't make a scene, Mom. That's what my son said. He leaned in close. Too close. So close, I could smell the sage on his breath. The turkey had just come out of the oven, still steaming. My hands were already wrapped around the gravy boat. I didn't answer him. I just nodded, small, automatic, like a child being corrected in public. For a second, I wasn't even embarrassed. That came later. At first, I was just confused because I couldn't remember planning to make a scene. I couldn't remember raising my voice. I couldn't remember doing anything except standing there in my own kitchen on Thanksgiving, holding gravy. I passed it to my daughter-in-law. She didn't look at me, just took it, turned away. And that's when something shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small drop in my stomach. Like when you miss a step you didn't know was there. Before we continue, if this story resonates with you, comment below how it made you feel and where you're watching from. Your support helps stories like this reach more people. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd been up since before sunrise that day. Not because anyone asked me to be. I just always am on Thanksgiving. Old habits don't argue back. Coffee on. Lights low. The house quiet in that particular way that feels earned, not empty. I remember standing at the sink, rinsing celery, thinking how strange it was that no one had asked what time dinner should be this year. They just told me. My son had called a week earlier and said, "We'll be there around 2. Not, "Is that okay?" Just, "We'll be there." I told myself it didn't matter. Families come. That's the point, right? By 10 o'clock, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. Shoes by the door that weren't mine. Voices in rooms I hadn't stepped into yet. Someone turned on the TV without asking. Football murmuring in the background, like static you stop noticing after a while. I kept busy. That's what I do when I don't know where to stand. At one point, I reached for the cabinet where I keep the good serving spoons, the same cabinet I've used for 35 years. And my daughter-in-law said lightly, helpful, "Oh, we moved those. They're over here now." "We moved," I laughed. A short sound. Too quick. Didn't say anything else. Just nodded again. That nod, it's become a reflex. The table was set differently too. More place cards than usual. My seat wasn't at the head anymore. It was on the side, near the end. Not the very end, just close enough that I noticed. I told myself it was nothing. People change things up. I told myself I was being silly, but my body didn't agree. My shoulders stayed tight. My jaw hurt by noon, so when my son leaned in and whispered not to make a scene, all of it rushed back at once. The moved spoons, the new seating, the way conversations seemed to pause when I entered a room, then pick back up once I left. It wasn't about the gravy. I know that now. But in that moment, all I knew was that everyone seemed to be reacting to something I hadn't been told. I sat down, smoothed my napkin, folded my hands in my lap, and that's that's when I realized whatever was happening, it had already started, and I was already behind. Dinner moved on without me ever quite joining it. I was there, physically, chair pulled in, plate in front of me, but the conversation floated somewhere just out of reach. They talked over me, not sharply, not cruelly, just naturally. Stories I'd heard before, told again without anyone looking my way. Jokes that landed flat for me because I didn't know what came before them. At one point, my grandson asked, "Wait, did Grandma know?" And my daughter said quickly, "We'll talk later." Later never came. I chewed slowly. Too slowly, the turkey went dry in my mouth. The room felt louder than it should have, plates clinking, someone laughing too hard at something that wasn't that funny. I kept thinking, what story? What is it that everyone knows? I tried to retrace myself the last few months. Conversations, phone calls, little moments. Had I said something wrong? Forgotten something important? Crossed a line without realizing it? My memory isn't what it used to be, but it isn't gone. Nothing stood out. After dinner, they started clearing the table without asking me. I reached for a dish. My daughter-in-law said, "It's okay, we've got it." Her hand stayed on the plate, firm, possessive. So I let go. I went into the living room and sat in my old chair. The one with the sagging arm. The one my husband used to nap in. No one followed. From there, I could hear them in the kitchen. Not whispering. Not really trying to hide it. Just talking in that way people do when they assume you can't hear anymore. "She doesn't need to know everything," my son said. And someone else, maybe his wife, maybe his sister, I couldn't tell, said, "It's for the best. She gets emotional." I stared at the blank TV screen, dark glass, reflections instead of pictures. My face looked older in it than it had that morning. That's when it settled. The warning, "Don't make a scene," wasn't about something I was doing. It was about what they were afraid I might do. Something important had already been decided, and I was the last one to know. I didn't say anything that night. That part matters. I hugged everyone at the door, said thank you, told them to drive safe. Watched the taillights disappear down the street like always. I even washed the last pan before bed, even though my hands were tired and my back was tight, and I could have left it for morning. Silence has been my default for a long time. I didn't learn it late in life. I learned it early. You keep things smooth. You don't ask questions that make people uncomfortable. You wait. Eventually, someone will explain. That's what I told myself. The house felt hollow after they left. Not lonely, hollow. Like space had been cleared out without asking what belonged there. I sat at the table long after the plates were gone. Napkins folded, chairs pushed in by someone else. My chair pushed in too far, like it didn't expect me to come back. I replayed the moment over and over. My son leaning in, the whisper, the careful tone, not angry, just cautious, like he was handling something fragile that might break if spoken to too loudly. I went to bed with that word in my head. I slept badly, up and down, dreamed of rooms where conversations stopped when I walked in, dreamed of doors I couldn't open because I didn't have the right key. In the morning, I made coffee and stood at the counter drinking it cold. That's when I noticed it. A folder on the kitchen counter. Not mine, manila, neat, set just to the side of the fruit bowl like someone meant to take it and forgot. I stood there longer than I want to admit, just looking at it, waiting for the feeling in my chest to tell me what to do. It didn't. I slid it toward me, opened it just enough to see printed pages inside. Headings, boxes, lines for signatures. I closed it again. I didn't read it. Not yet. That surprises people when I tell them later. They think curiosity would have taken over, but I've learned something about moments like that. Once you read words like those, you can't unread them. And I wasn't ready for whatever name they'd given me on that paper. So I left the folder where it was and went on with my day, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. Because now I knew whatever was happening was no longer just a feeling. It had a shape, and it was sitting right there on my counter. That week passed, strangely. Calls that usually came didn't. Messages were shorter than normal. Polite, efficient, like notes left on the counter instead of conversations. My son stopped by once to check in. That's the phrase he used. He didn't sit, didn't take his jacket off, stood in the doorway like he might be late for something else. He asked if I needed groceries, if the heat was working okay, if I'd thought any more about options. Options. I asked him what he meant. He smiled quick, practiced, and said, "We'll talk about it later." Later again. When he left, I noticed he glanced toward the counter. The folder was gone. That night, I sat in my chair and tried to be honest with myself. Not dramatic, not cruel, just honest. Was I forgetful sometimes? Yes. Names slip. Appointments need writing down. But I paid my bills. I cooked. I drove. I knew where I was. I knew who I was with. Had I leaned on them more than I used to, maybe. I called my daughter when the car made a noise I didn't recognize. I asked my son to change a light fixture I couldn't reach. That didn't feel like weakness to me. It felt like family. But maybe to them, it looked different. A few days later, my sister called. She doesn't call often. When she does, there's usually a reason. She talked around things at first. Weather, her neighbor's dog, a show she'd been watching. Then she said, "They're just worried about you." I held the phone tighter. Who's they? A pause. Not long, but long enough. "You know," she said, "your kids." I asked what they were worried about. "You being alone." I told her I wasn't alone. I had friends, neighbors, church on Sundays, a routine. Another pause. "Well," she said, "things change." That sentence stayed with me because it didn't accuse me of anything. It just assumed the ground had already shifted. After we hung up, I sat there with the phone in my hand, waiting for anger, or hurt, or something loud. What came instead was quieter. A slow awareness, like light coming up gradually in a room you didn't realize had gone dark. They weren't reacting to something I'd done recently. They were responding to an idea of me they'd already agreed on. Once I saw that, I started seeing other things too. The way my daughter corrected me mid-sentence, the way my son answered questions for me, the way conversations about the future stopped when I entered the room. I hadn't imagined it. I'd just been generous with my explanations. One afternoon, my granddaughter stopped by. She sat on the edge of the couch, phone in her hand. She asked if I remembered her friend's name. I did. She smiled, surprised, like I'd passed a test I hadn't known I was taking. Good, she said. That's good. I asked why she said it like that. She hesitated, shrugged. Everyone's just making sure you're okay. Everyone again. After she left, I walked through the house. Slowly, room by room, the worn arm of the chair, the dent in the hallway wall from when my son tried to skateboard indoors, the kitchen drawer that sticks unless you lift it just right. This house wasn't just shelter. It was proof of memory, of continuity, of competence. And that's when I understood something I hadn't let myself see before. This wasn't about safety. It was about control. Not cruel, not dramatic, just the quiet kind, the kind that grows when people stop seeing you as the authority in your own life. They hadn't asked me what I wanted because somewhere along the way, they decided wanting wasn't my job anymore. That realization didn't explode. It settled. If you've ever felt that slow shift where people start deciding for you instead of with you, you know it doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps. By the end of the second week, I wasn't confused anymore. I was paying attention, and that's when the letter came. Plain envelope. Tuesday afternoon. My name spelled correctly. That mattered. Return address in my son's careful handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I fed the birds, made toast, let the kettle boil too long. When I finally sat down, I opened it slowly. Not because I was afraid, because I wanted to stay steady. Inside were copies, not originals, forms, checkboxes, polite language that felt heavy. There was a note, short. We just want to make sure everything is in place for the future. We love you. Love was doing a lot of work in that sentence. I read everything. Then again. Then once more, slower. They weren't taking anything yet. They were preparing, assuming agreement later. I folded the papers back into the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. What I felt was something quieter than either. Clarity. That afternoon, I drove myself to the post office, stood in line, asked a question about certified mail. The clerk answered me plainly, didn't rush, didn't soften her voice. She didn't look at me like I was fragile. That mattered more than she knew. Over the next few weeks, I did ordinary things. I scheduled appointments, made calls, asked questions, wrote things down in my own handwriting. I didn't tell my children what I was doing, not to hide it. I just needed to be sure of it first. When my son called to check in, I answered like usual. Calm, pleasant. I didn't mention the letter. At one point, he said, we should probably talk about next Thanksgiving. There it was again. The future spoken for. I said, we can talk about that. Not yes, not no, just later. A few days after that, I invited him over, just him. I poured coffee, took my time. I slid an envelope across the table. He opened it. His face changed, not dramatically, just enough. I let the silence work. Finally, he said, Mom, we were just trying to help. I know, I said, and I meant it. I told him what I needed. Conversations, not decisions. Respect before protection. To be asked. He listened. When he left, he hugged me longer than usual. Not tighter, just longer. Things didn't change overnight, but they did change. My seat came back to the head of the table. No announcement. Someone asked me what time dinner should be. I answered. The folder never came back. Thanksgiving the next year was quieter, simpler. And yes, I hosted. When the turkey came out of the oven, steaming, I stood there holding the gravy boat again. No one whispered this time. And that made all the difference.